He was in here right before. One, two, that.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
So should I?
You shall proceed.
Okay. I think Emily wanted to phone the ledge council friend.
I wasn't, and then we talked, Grady and I conferred a little bit, and so what this does, so yeah, this adds, the governor had recommended adding that the emergency board response to a declared emergency while the General Assembly is out of session could sort of unreserve this amount from the balance reserve to replenish the spending authority if needed, right? So if we find ourselves in a situation, but how I would frame it is with the July flood last year, we had that nice $20 million of funding appropriated to the treasurer that wasn't being used, that could be redeployed to deal with flood recovery. There was a similar situation in the year before that. But I don't know that every year there is necessarily going to be an appropriation in the event of emergency that the emergency board is going to be able to redeploy quickly. Sometimes they'll sort of go to the Department of Corrections and move money. And this is just sort of another tool in the toolbox that they could go to the general fund balance reserve as an option to help backfill areas that need to spend money unanticipated.
And last question is, would this stay in place if we did nothing indefinitely, or is this coming budget year?
So this amends the statute, so it would be indefinitely. So this would add both in response to a declared emergency. This would be an allowable use, and if there is a change in revenue estimates for federal funding. So this sort of allows what was added in the House, I believe, with this. If there's a reduction in state revenue estimates for federal funding, then the emergency board could use this pot of money to deal with that issue if needed.
Yeah, I don't feel super strongly about it, but I would say if we're talking about making this change for indefinitely going forward, it's a little more authority than I would like to invest in the e-board when we're out of session. But given that we'll probably be in the situation for the next 4 years, it makes sense.
Go ahead.
I tend to agree with you. And my question is, why wouldn't we put it in session law? We do lots of stuff in session law and we just re-up it every budget that we go along. So we just bring this language back next January to put in the bill again is session law, or we can tweak it. But I would just assume that we get past this hump and we go back to what is normal practice.
Yeah. And I guess that'd be my preference too. I don't know how difficult that is to.
We can go find Bryn and work on that. I will say that the 300 page bill that is at the printer right now will not have that change in it. So that will just be a change we will make prior to your vote.
But if
And we'll give you the language that we changed.
We could also adjust it in the conference committee.
Yeah, maybe if we have an understanding that would be our direction, I'm fine with this going into the conference.
Because there's definitely the sections open that's very different than what the House had. And I think that's reasonable.
I don't know that this section, that E 127.2 is actually different from what the House did. So we can go talk to Brandon and see how tricky it would be to draft it.
But I think half of the bill is session law.
True. Yeah. I don't know how complicated. I don't think it's very complicated for Brandon to turn this into a session law construct. Just don't know what she's doing this afternoon. We can track it down. But I think we can do that before you vote on it. Okay.
But what changes? Why would you have it in here if it's the House though?
I think what we would propose to change, what I think
Why would it be in this packet if it's just the House?
was that because it's related to the year-end closeout. stuff, or like what happened, not hearing quote out, what happens in, when you are not in session and there's a change to federal funding.
So you did change with the House.
Not for this part, but it's sort of all of those sections related to how we're changing authority of like the emergency board and what's their names, the joint fiscal.
You just wanted to have it all in there.
All like, yeah, here's all of it as one, because you should look at them all together, because it's everything. But we can go find Brand. I'm gonna guess that the chief is messaging her as we speak about this.
Okay.
Okay,
And if 127 was open, I don't know if it matters at point. It was not different, and we have added 0.3 as far as addressing it in conference.
or the subsections are the. It would be the 127 is different from 127 by in terms of like this whole.
Right. Yeah.
So 127, you want to,
So it's 170, 127, they have changed.
127 is the same. The House version, but I don't know,
The whole 123.
we can look, maybe we'll
Okay.
look at.
I thought the 127.3 was the new one. So that's not new.
127.3 is the newest one. This will be, 127.3 will be open for conference, maybe, because the House had.
That makes an argument that all 27 is open if you're adding a 127.3. So,
I have to ask Blue.
yeah.
Okay, so in 127.3, this is very similar to the language that the sort of general concept we spoke about yesterday. It is changed slightly after we looked at the numbers. I think we had a sort of, 1% or $15 million, whichever is less, but we tweaked that a little bit after looking at numbers. So the first part is just some definitions. So for the purposes of the sort of calculations, I should back up. So in the big picture, if there is a reduction in federal funding while the General Assembly is out of session, the Emergency Board and or the Joint Fiscal Committee will need to take some action, potentially deal with that loss of federal funds. So we have to set up the structure for how that will work. Because the rescission language as it exists in statute right now really only addresses changes in the transportation fund or the general fund revenue forecasts. So the first part A defines unduplicated appropriation as the total appropriations set forth in this act, so in the budget. And we talked about duplicated appropriations, right? So that excludes global commitments, interdepartmental transfers, and internal service funds. And so what this language will do further along is basically in subpart B, and then subpart 2 is defining the government function unit as those sort of government functions that are defined in the act. So we talked about this yesterday. If you go to 108 or 108 in section A, that's where you see general government, protection, education, labor, human services, natural resources, etc., sort of defined. So in each instance, that the unduplicated appropriations for each of those government functions is reduced by less than 1/2 of 1%, so 0.05%. And the Secretary of Administration shall notify the Joint Fiscal Committee. And they can they can manage that sort of small reduction by themselves.
Okay,
The administration.
okay, so they can act unilaterally, they just have duty to.
Correct. If the unduplicated appropriation for any government function is decreased by in between 1% and less than 1/2 of 1%, then the Secretary of Administration has to prepare and sort of by that government function has to prepare an expenditure reduction and transfer plan for the Joint Fiscal Committee and then follow the existing rescission statute that sort of says they have 21 days to report back to JFC. JFC reviews and approves, etc. So that's the sort of window, and they can't transfer more than federal funds. And one thing I should point out, I sort of skipped over it really quick, but so in terms of calculating unduplicated appropriations, we are recommending the exclusion of the education fund in that calculation. The Agency of Education is, about a $400 million appropriation. If you add in the education fund, that's an additional $2.4 billion. So the 1/2 of 1% and the 1% is very different whether or not you include the education fund. And so for the purposes of this calculation, JFO thought it didn't make sense to include the education fund because that sort of happens separately from state government anyway. That's really school district funds. So take it out of the calculation for this purpose. Yes.
Can I ask quickly, page 10?
Yeah.
Line 3. So the Secretary of Administration notifies joint approval by the Joint Fiscal Committee. And then it says the Joint Fiscal Committee may make a recommendation. So the Joint Fiscal Committee could decide not to make a recommendation.
Yes, and this recommendation is specific to the emergency board. So this would be if the administration proposes a plan that says these federal funds are reduced and we think that the best strategy to manage this is to have the emergency board transfer money from that one-time appropriation to this department as part of managing this, then that would be the sort of then the Joint Fiscal Committee would say, okay, so as part of this plan, we need the emergency board to execute this transaction. So that's the sort of ask the emergency board to do these things
So if
as part of that.
if they don't like the plan,
Yeah.
then they may not recommend, and then the administration can come back with a revised plan.
Yes, that's part of the existing rescission statute, is that
Okay.
they can't execute the plan unless there's approval by Joint Fiscal Committee, and Joint Fiscal can reject the plan that's presented. And it may be that they come forward with a plan that does not involve the emergency board transferring any money, in which case they don't have to recommend to the emergency board to make the transfers.
Okay.
And subpart C. So this is one of the challenges with federal funds so currently the emergency board only adopts the federal fund revenue as part of the official forecast in July. They only adopt the number that is in the current year Appropriations Act, which makes it impossible to calculate a difference. So what Section C is doing is saying that, so for the purposes of calculating, you have to sort of set a baseline federal fund amount or sort of an initial federal fund amount. So what Section C does is says, for the purposes of this section and any issues with federal funds, the sort of starting place for federal funds is whatever is passed in the Appropriations Act. And then the emergency board, when they adopt the revenue forecast in July, they don't need to adopt anyone any further. Their sort of starting point is what's in the bill. And then if there's a difference, that's how you calculate the difference to come to the 1/2 of 1% or more than 1% or whatever that amount is. But that sort of is a way in session law to sort of have a starting place and something to jump off from when we do the forecast. Otherwise, we have if there's a change in federal, we have nothing to base it off.
Right. And any updated state federal funds revenue, that's not the official revenue.
So the official revenue forecast is
Twice a year.
twice a year.
But
And
this seems to suggest that you're a series of.
yeah, there is an ability to adopt a new forecast if needed, and that's happened. I believe it happened in 2009. Economic recession. There was a need to adopt a new forecast just because stuff was changing so quickly and revenues were changing so fast. It was a way to sort of readjust where the revenue the budget was gonna use. And I think this is contemplating that, like, depending on what happens with federal funds, there may be a need to have a new forecast to reset what the federal funds are going to be to trigger the process of changing the budget.
But at the end of the day, it would have to be the majority of the e-boards adopting it. So.
Yes.
Senator West.
With this, I'm not really fond of. I'm just gonna say to you, I'm not really fond of picking the budgeted federal numbers to that. because particularly with human services, there's a lot of caseload adjustment. And if for some, and I'm not expecting it, caseload went down, but then we had a cut, that would maintain your same budget number from that. That the calculation based upon caseload.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think in that, I have to think through that.
Would make a recommendation. Yeah, and I'm sure that this is all gonna be talked about going forward in the conference committee, but I raised that if there was a caseload adjustment in here, it's a per case amount. So, and that's a calculation.
The federal funds could draw up just as case loads,
Yes,
which not considered in this company.
right. Or you could have caseload go up and we met the numbers that were in the budget, but we're really getting less.
Right. There was,
Well, I wonder if you say something like, to the detriment of services provided by the state. So in that case, caseload drop. It's not exactly a detriment. Something.
right.
I mean, we're really putting a lot of trust in joint fiscal and the E-board to get into the weeds with these calculations once they get to the moment.
Right.
And they get a report from the Secretary of Administration. They're gonna really have to investigate for reasons we're just talking about. Because the triggers will be operative, but they just trigger part of those E-board and
Right.
so trust in those committees.
I just say get this in, the E-board usually goes in, everything's presented to them and they vote on it. And the E-board in the 40 years, all the years I've been around in doing this. And since they created the system where we have revenue estimates that are joint, the E-board never takes the vessel. They get the two economists in, they sit in front of them, that's it. Joint fiscal does take testimony. And so there's a clear difference in the way they handle stuff.
And joint fiscal is the one that may make.
Right, and that's, that always runs in the back of my mind.
All right. So we don't have that section about the General Assembly having come back. That was in our later version.
It's like current rescission language is silent also on it. It just says that you only pay, this is how what you do in these situations. If you otherwise you're back to the administration and the judges, they don't have authority to act beyond this.
But it's still required the governor. There's no other way to
I
come.
think there is some discussion about adjournment. By you adjourn, but your resolution.
So we could either adjourn to prepare for that, or the governor calls us back. That's the only two.
I would defer to the Secretary of the Senate. For you.
Okay.
And that was counting done in joint fiscal. On page 11,
John.
on page 11, this is language relating to the Vermont Community Radio Grant Program. So in your bill, you're making a one-time appropriation for this program. This language currently lives in page 397, but without it being in the budget, you'd be appropriating to a program that doesn't exist yet. So there's just the program language tied to that appropriation.
Good.
On page 14, I'll refer to Senator Lyons on this. This is a new section E300.3 relating to settlement funds and primary care providers.
Right, so right now, as we know, the UVM Health Network has has responsibility for providing $11 million to primary care providers through an order by the Green Mountain Care Board. And so when that money becomes available and perhaps go through a grant or in some way
is accessed by the Agency of Human Services, it will be distributed for primary care, but that means that it could supplant some of the dollars that we currently have in the budget. So this language is intent language, so that following the receipt of any of those monies, then and the following distribution of those settlement funds, then we could reappropriate or look to appropriate the funds that are not currently would be replaced by that. So in a sense, it gives us, if this goes along according to plan, that will give us more money to distribute for mental health, primary care, mental health, substance abuse disorder, or other health services in the state. So it's for me, it's a found opportunity to use the funds that are replaced by the settlement funds, should those settlement funds be distributed as indicated there.
Kind of sets us up for the VA. We'll get this report back and then we can see if
It will be,
changes
yeah,
it could be.
it could be, I don't know the exact agreement for how the funds are being distributed or used. One suggestion was it might be quarterly, beginning in January 1st. If that's the case, then the VAA is really the place that we can make decisions. I mean, and this is a work in progress. I think we need to remember that. We don't know what the final decision will be made between the board, agency involvement, and the hospital.
Something, for example, like a light labor help.
That was my
Eligible, yeah, because recruitment of primary care doctors, we haven't said anything about that anywhere in this.
that was exactly the kind of thing that this would allow for.
Okay, any questions about this?
Because I could just say it does distribute we in this whole thing, don't have any prevention.
Exactly.
And I would like.
So, but as I said, this is our language in place, and I really thank Jen Kirby and Nolan and Brady for helping get this together in short term.
Okay. Looks good. We can all add it in.
On page 15, so this is the same language as what the committee saw yesterday relating to pushing out the effective dates of certain appropriations made for rate increases. So this section was open, just including it here for further committee discussion.
We didn't create a list of the appropriations. We talked about that. You don't know, you guys were creating the entire budget. So at one point we were saying we're going to maybe have a list instead of the sections, because sometimes the sections had a whole bunch of things and we weren't sure if it was everything in that section.
So the way this is written, it's specifically for the rate increases within those, so not the appropriation, not those sections themselves, but the appropriations in those sections for the specific rate increases. Because you wouldn't want to make, for instance, the entirety of B301 effective on November 1st.
Or rate. Okay, any questions? Right.
On page 16, again, I would defer to Senator Lyons. This is report language relating to directing the Commissioner for Children and Families and the Chief Superior Judge to jointly submit a report to the relevant standing committees on funding for supervised visitation programs in consultation with the Center for Crime Victim Services, the Vermont Network, and supervised visitation providers.
That's it.
And I did ask to hear from Judge Sone to make sure that the Chief Superior Judge was supportive, and I did get an email to that effect. So I have talked to staff at Department of Children and Families, and said that the department was willing, supportive of doing the study, so, okay, adding it with their approval of the study.
On page 17. So this was language, again, that was brought up yesterday relating to pushing out rulemaking related to Act 154, the Child Abuse Prevention Act. Pushing out the rulemaking filing date by 1 year. So just including it here for committee consideration.
Where did this come from? Did you have a question about this?
Actually, DCF proposed this
Oh, right.
and,
Yes.
it's not without controversy. I think it may come up be discussed during conference. Because it is the child abuse registry that, people are very anxious about in place. So we'll probably hear more about it.
But you're recommending
I
from
think,
your committee to
think
keep this like.
yeah, I think it's fine to keep it in, yeah, but as I said, it may come up during.
And-
There, what happens is if it's not here, then the department will have to do 2 sets of rulemaking within one short period of time. So there's obvious the need for 2 and brings it back to 1.
Okay.
On pages 18 and 19, this is a proposal from Senator Westman. So this adds language to the funding reporting language for adult education in sub B, directing the Secretary of Administration to make a recommendation to the relevant standing committees on any updates to the adult education funding formula. And also make a recommendation on any administrative changes to adult education, including which agency or department outside of the agency of education is best suited to manage adult education grants. And then in sub D on page 19, directing the agency of education to consult with adult education literacy providers prior to distributing funding and to distribute funds according to a per head basis formula.
Not as far as I wanted to go, but given where we are, it does sort of defeat to the fire and the dark.
We'll make sure that everybody gets treated.
Yes.
The recommendation from the Secretary of the OA. Did you talk to the Secretary of the OA? Did they check the day?
I would need for this to be taken out.
But this is just if they have recommendations. If they don't,
It,
they shall make a recommendation to each, so they have.
there is in statute this, there is asked for, and there is a process for a recommendation for on how to change the formula to hand the money out from last year. And they're supposed to report back in December. This, readjusts that language. It includes the Secretary of Administration and administration in that piece. So a recommendation around this is already in the process.
It just adds the OA section. Okay. Any questions of Westman of this proposal? Okay, why that is
Great. With that, I think that we can get you draft copies of the bill.
I just got word that there will be one small change in the final version. It's all good. It changed about 9 times in the last 24 hours. Back to where we wanted it. This relates to the funding from the cash fund for the St. Albans recovery residents. We were told this morning that it should go to the health department. And now we just got word that it should go to the Department of Housing and Community Development. So the bill will say go to the health department. We're gonna change it to Housing and Community Development unless anybody has any objections per the institutions committee, is that's where the capital bill is gonna send.
and they took testimony as to name.
It's,
They have the right place, yeah. We want it to go to the right.
great.
In the right place is working.
Department of Housing and Community Development. My understanding is they have a grant program for recovery residency, this type of thing anyway, so it makes no sense for it. Great, okay.
Good question.
Yeah, I had a question too on the construct of this language in here. November 1st start date. At one point we talked about also having it for one times, for some of the one times. We don't have that in here.
Correct, there is no, all of the one times are effective upon passage, as the bill is currently written. I think because most of those sections, that whole section has changed, that could be a conversation for the conference committee. If you so
Right.
want to speak for an amendment on the floor or.
Sarah Watson.
Thanks, this is going back a little bit, but thinking about the off-session procedures. Just wanted to check, so because we had a prior draft of the language that had this language in section 704, and that's still there, right? Like that's not, negated by this new draft, because this would be adding sections. Or does 704A go away? Or it's E127,
E127 is gonna be replaced by this new language,
all of them.
yes.
Okay, because maybe I have because so this has got. Okay, I think
We can look at it offline if that's easier too.
yeah, I think it may be fine. I was just wondering like how to mesh this with that. So I think it's there. Okay. I'm good.
Including 127.0. Just if you would assume these seven. I don't know if that's just house changes or not, but it doesn't matter. So all the language that's in here of 127 will be in the final list. If there's any different from an earlier version, it would be this version.
Yeah, okay.
Center wants, center west.
Well, it's probably better if it was in one position. I would just say in the one-time monies. And my concern about that is if I got one-time money in, on the 1st of July. And we didn't do anything until September, I would spend that money immediately. And so I think the only way you would, to do this is, hold the money. And I'm.
It's 100, all at one time is 100 million.
Right, and if, if that one-time money will be gone before the end of July. And I hate to say this, and I hate this because I hate the potential situation.
I know we only need 200 million to keep our insurance premiums at a level of 5%. 200. We have a lot of.
We're not in good shape.
Yeah, we're gonna be talking about that whole section in the conference committee, so I'm gonna hold that up, hold it to the conference committee instead of trying to go through the one times and see if there's anything. There might be something in there that we want to utilize first, but we'll have time for the conference committee to figure that out. If there's anything that we don't want to post to move to November 1st.
I hate where we are in
Yeah.
it, but I felt I have the reason.
Yeah, it's good fun. No, we didn't talk about it. Okay, any other questions for the dynamic duo of JFL? Okay, so you
got
have spreadsheets, you have web reports?
web reports, spreadsheets will be around. If you have questions or if you find anything,
And what about the whole bill?
and the bill is, Amy's got it, somebody's got it.
There's a big box.
So we also have, you wanna do this updated sheet? Let's just.
Yeah.
Do this, so we. Yesterday, Amy handed out all the positions. Which. So this is, there was a couple of corrections. I don't know if you, Emily, or you, Amy, want to tell, just, we don't need to go through it again, but. If
You want me to?
Yeah, I thought we lowered them, I mean, raised.
Oh, does it?
This is their,
Raise it, but
Oh. Incorporate fiscal, so, so on the first page, B 329. There are 5 positions at Dale that the governor recommended that I did have on this list, so the governor's number went up and ours did as well.
so all the numbers went up, like where B 329.
B 329, for the
Three,
conflict management,
Free case management.
yeah.
okay. Also just 222. Oh, and the 3
Yeah.
quality of program. Okay. So our delta between the governor and the house is the same, but it's everybody got raised up.
Yeah.
so my memory was when we went over the Green Mountain Care Board. There was not 8, but there was ultimately less than 8,
Yeah,
Could be
6, should be 6.
Six.
but it's listed. There was 8 listed.
Well, if you look at the column, some of the positions are listed, but there's no number there. Are you looking at
I'm just looking at the entries on the left.
yeah, go all the way to the right
Okay,
and there's not a number. So some of them were
got it.
asked for and
Didn't get,
didn't happen.
but we should take them off the sheet.
Probably would be easier to understand if we took them up.
Sure.
That's the next sheet. And then there was, I assume we took the one up to the Attorney General. There was a third one on there. We took that one off because it wasn't in a position.
What about the land use review board?
The land use review board is still on.
There's-
But it wasn't creating a new position, it was converting from limited to permanent. So it's on here because we created it, and that's an issue with the state's attorneys. We created these positions. Like the 9 service positions converted to permanent aren't counted as new positions. We did create transport deputies and the new financial and IT specialist. We just need to fund.
So are these now new positions? So
These are new positions, and I clarified with them because they were thinking that they weren't like official new positions, so they'll have a number. These are real positions that they could hire.
non-use their $650,000 in vacancies.
They could use that or other funds that they get.
Well, that was my question. If they're going to use the $650,000 to keep, we replace their vacancies, which will keep them status quo, so I don't lose any person or something.
Yeah.
Do they have to use that, or are these actually new positions that we're looking at here?
These are new positions, but we didn't add funding to the budget for these positions, so they have to find the funding somewhere. Could be from their vacancy savings if they have enough vacancy savings over the year. They could say, we think we're gonna have this vacancy savings, they could hire the positions. And then they could come up back to the BEA and said, oh, it turned out we didn't have as much vacancy savings as we thought. So we need an adjustment in the Budget Adjustment Act in January.
So they could come back to the committee with that.
Yeah.
If they can't find the funding, then it's not, these aren't good positions.
They're created positions, but they're not really new positions if they can't actually hire them yet. And so we're trying to hope to either find them some money or make that clear that they're gonna, the 650 between the two, they're gonna have some vacancy savings somewhere. I don't know if it'll be enough, but but they, working with the administration, they could hire these. Okay, so that's all the positions. That's 125. Well, I'll look at later. I was just wondering where that bill was. So here's the budget. Should I pass out the budget? You have one there?
Yeah, I mean, any, you can stay live, go off live, totally up to you. But I
Well,
think,
we're gonna go off live, but that's, you pass out those, and then you have new.
Elle's got the spreadsheets, which if you want a copy of them to look at, you can hand them out, you can go grab them out.
So the spreadsheets, like we went over yesterday, there'll be a couple small corrections.
The only correction is moving the apprenticeship program from base one.
Okay, so, but it's gonna be the official.
Maybe some notes.
So this is the web for. You can get a new spreadsheet and then you can get a bill. So we're gonna come back. I know you have something at 4. So. Where all we need to do is come back and vote. So we could come back at 3:45, see if that's enough time for people to read the